All right, welcome everyone. Um, Today I'm going to be talking about hexagon symmetries on origami tessellations and what to look for to see, is this a hexagon symmetry? Is this not? And what does that tell me about the tessellation? How can I use that when I'm folding? So, hi everyone, I'm Madonna from Gathering Folds. Let's dive right in. So first, I want to talk about these examples that I have right in front of me. The first one is these two pieces. It's the same exact pattern. I've got a closed hexagon, so that's a closed back and a closed triangle. And the structure here is that the closed hexagon has 6 triangles around it, or I should go with the numbers, and each triangle has 3 hexagons around it. And when I say around, I mean directly connected by pleats. So these two tessellations both share hexagon symmetry because they share this structure. Now, one of these is folded on a square and the other is folded on a hexagon. So there's a separate question of whether your finished piece actually has a 6-fold rotational center or not. In this case, the maximum symmetry for the triangle grid on a square is 2-fold rotation, but the infinite conception of the tessellation itself, the infinite pattern, has these positions of 6-fold rotational symmetry. Now, there's some things that we'll see that are common across all tessellations with positions of 6-fold rotational symmetry, these hexagon symmetry types. And that is a hexagon twist. Now, as I alluded to, these hexagon twists can be used in ways with lower symmetries, but when we see hexagons, we should immediately think, oh, is this 6-fold rotationally symmetric? Can I see the same thing in each of 6 directions, equally spaced out around the central position, and so the angle between these directions is 60 degrees. That's the full meaning of 6-fold rotational symmetry. So let's go through here. And like we've seen in previous symmetry types, in the square symmetries and the triangle symmetries, we have an option, and here the native tiling for the hexagon symmetry is hexagons and triangles 6-fold. We have an option to alternate a hexagon and a triangle, so we can pick, are we going to have a closed hexagon with closed triangles, or are we going to put open triangles? Are we going to use open hexagons and triangles? So if we look at this, we'll see both hexagon and triangle holes. Are we going to put, so this is still closed hexagon, closed triangle, are we going to put them on the same side or opposite sides? We can have an open triangle with a closed hexagon on opposite sides. We can have an open hexagon, closed triangle on opposite sides. We can have any of these combinations. So if you take those 3 binary choices, open or closed hexagon, open or closed triangle, same side or opposite sides, each of those is a multiplier of 2 on our choices. And so in the standard type, in the alternating symmetry, that's our limitation. We have 8 options. But there's a lot more than 8 things in front of me, and you'll see I'll bring out another stack towards the end. And we actually have a lot more options. So if you look back, I have this star weave that has an open hexagon, closed triangles, and then I pick a different hexagon. So this open hexagon is 6-fold rotationally symmetric, but this outer hexagon is only 3-fold rotationally symmetric. So it has these 3 triangles with the same spacing, and then 3 other triangles with a different spacing. So not all of the hexagons need to be in 6-fold rotationally symmetric positions. And in fact, if you limit them to those positions, then you get limited options going forward. You can also add rhombi into the mix. You can add them directly next to the hexagons. So you see this is on the same pleat. Or you can add them further out. You can do the triangles first, and then instead of going back to a hexagon, you can do a rhombus. And there's a lot of flexibility with those patterns as well. You can have the triangles on the back, you can have the triangles on the front, you can have the rhombi on the front, you can have the rhombi on the back. And so again, you can play with the open triangles or closed triangles. You can use open hexagons or closed hexagons. You can just go through all these different variations. And then there's also, back to this version with the rhombi up close, you can have these clumps that then get repeated out in other places. So what I want to explore with this one in particular is what symmetries come with a 6-fold rotational symmetry. So we've got 6-fold rotational symmetry in the center. And then anytime there's a 6-fold rotational symmetry, you will also see other symmetries as well. You will see 3-fold rotational symmetry. So these positions where you can see in 3 directions, I've got these open triangles on the back, and in 3 other directions, I've got standard rhombi on the front. So that's a 3-fold position. Here, 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 here. And then there is also, so directly between 2 3-fold positions and between 2 6-fold positions, so we're creating a cross, an intersection here between rotationally symmetric positions that are the same. Because we have 2 3-folds on opposite sides and then 2 6-folds on opposite sides, I actually have a position of 2-fold rotational symmetry directly between these 2 rhombi. And so what I can say is, okay, around my 6-fold rotational symmetry, I can draw a hexagon that's actually the repeating tile of the mathematical tessellation that describes everything I need to know. And it goes 3-fold at the corner, 2-fold in the middle, 3-fold at the next corner, and on around, alternating 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. And so since this is the edge of a hexagon shape, the 3, 2, 3 is an exactly straight line. This is true of any of our tessellations. So if we take this one with the hexagon, triangle, rhombus, triangle loop, then my 3-fold position is out here in these open spaces, and my 2-fold position is inside the rhombus. If we go back to our tessellation, actually, do that one after, I'll do one with these rhombi. So here you can see I'm going from a hexagon to a rhombus, and then out the other side of that same rhombus, I get to another equivalent hexagon. So here the rhombus is the position of 2-fold rotational symmetry, and I've got a triangle on the back here. It's easier to see from the back that this triangle is in a position of 3-fold rotational symmetry. We can also see that from the front, these 3 rhombi going around this point in the center of 3 rhombi, that point is 3-fold rotationally symmetric. So we've got our 3, 2, 3, 2, 3 hexagon going around our position of 6-fold rotational symmetry. Now we can apply that to our alternating patterns as well. Here, the 3-fold positions are in the center of the triangles. 6-fold positions are in the hexagons, 3-fold positions are in the triangles. And so each of our twists is occupying a position in the overall pattern that maximizes its symmetry potential. So the hexagon twist all on its own is 6-fold rotationally symmetric, and it is occupying a position of 6-fold rotational symmetry. The triangle twist all on its own is 3-fold rotationally symmetric, and in this case it is occupying a position in the global pattern of 3-fold rotational symmetry. Now, where's the 2 here? The 2 is actually at this grid intersection halfway between the hexagons and halfway between 2 triangles. So we find where the line between 2 6-fold symmetries cross, a line between 2 3-fold symmetries. And that's where we locate our 2-fold symmetry. Now we can play with this in the same tiling. So here still we have hexagons surrounded by triangles, triangles surrounded by hexagons, but this triangle is surrounded by 2 hexagons of one type and 1 hexagon of another. So it's not 3-fold rotationally symmetric. Instead, these hexagons out here have 3 triangles that are the same spacing and then 3 other triangles that are the same spacing as each other but different from the first set. So these are our 3-fold positions, these outer hexagons. And then here between the 3-fold positions, between 2 6-fold positions, is our position of 2-fold rotational symmetry. So there's a lot to talk about here, and I have another stack of tessellations. These were the teaching tessellations that I've done, and various example prototypes. But before I get into those, I want to show you some diagrams of exactly what I've been talking about. So let's hop on over to the screen, and actually I'll bring up screen and desk so we can see these examples as they come up. So in my hexagons and triangles 6-fold tiling, hexagon surrounded by triangles, triangles surrounded by hexagons, I can go in and say, okay, what's the maximum symmetry? Like I showed you before on this tessellation, we've got our 6-fold positions in the hexagons, our 3-fold positions in the triangles, and our 2-fold positions in between the crossing of the 3s and the crossing of the 6s. So then if we want to see the broader symmetry, the symmetry that's spaced further out, we can have our 6-fold position, so like this open hexagon here, and then the 3-fold position is out in the next hexagon. So that's like these closed hexagons out here. And our 2-fold position is in between 2 of our 3-fold hexagons. So let's look at some more examples. I've got another one right here. Here you can see these triangles are not in rotationally symmetric positions at all. In the diagram you can see that the centers of the triangles are blank. And so I've got my 6-fold rotational symmetry in the central hexagon, and then threefold positions. So this hexagon has 3 of these sixfold positions, 3 of these threefold positions around it. And we can draw a hexagon between the centers of our threefold rotationally symmetric hexagons that completely describes everything that's going on in this tessellation. Continuing. This one's the same as the one I was showing earlier. I've got a different example here, which we'll get into. This is another of these threefold outer hexagons. That's another different example. Here we've got threefold outer hexagons as well. And likewise here all the hexagons are on the back side, so I can flip this over. I can see clearly that there are hexagons of hexagons surrounding my hexagons. You can tell I love these hexagon symmetries because the sixfold rotation and folding it on a hexagon is just so near and dear to my heart. And there's so many more options that I figured out this spring that I had no clue were available before. So all of these tessellations that I'm showing in the second pile, I folded within the last year. Here again, we have the hexagon of hexagons surrounding our hexagon. And while we're here, there is a way to take this out even further. So what if the hexagon of hexagons surrounding our hexagon, I just love saying that, what if that hexagon of hexagons surrounding our hexagon is not threefold rotationally symmetric, but instead twofold? So this is what I call the Far Islands symmetry, where the hexagon of hexagons, so the 6 hexagons surrounding our central, our sixfold hexagon, has twofold rotational symmetry. So we can see on this pattern, I've got 2 of my sixfold hexagons on either side of my outer hexagon, which puts the threefold rotational symmetry out into these triangles over here. So that's yet another way that we can use this hexagon symmetry to find new and interesting patterns. So continuing from there, I've got another version of this where instead of having the hexagons all on the same side, I put the central hexagon on the front, closed hexagon, outer hexagon on the back as a closed hexagon, and then my triangles. You'll notice I have 2 different triangles here. I've got an open triangle towards the center, a closed triangle in that threefold position. So this triangle here has these 3 star structures around it. Likewise, in the previous tessellation, the triangles around the central hexagon are different from the triangles that have the threefold rotational symmetry. And I'll be describing in a future video what is causing that shift and how we can predict what that shift is going to be in advance based on the change in our central to corner hexagons. So we've got all these options. Now let me bring up a different tiling. So having rhombi surrounding our hexagon. And we did look at this briefly earlier, but I want to look at this with the diagram in view. So when we have rhombi surrounding our hexagon with triangles occupying these positions of threefold rotational symmetry, I can go in and say, okay, what's my maximum symmetry possible? Zoom in on that. I've got the sixfold rotational symmetry in the center of the hexagon, as we would expect. And actually, let me flip this over so you can see the hexagons and triangles more clearly. So we've got our hexagonal center. We've got our threefold rotational symmetry out in the triangles. And then in between two triangles is the rhombus, and we've got that twofold position right there in between. This holds true for all three of these tessellations, and it's most clear in this one, in lens stars. So we've got the open hexagon on the back, then the closed triangle on the front, the rhombus on the front, and you can clearly see these hexagonal structures where if I just cut out this amount of the tessellation and then plopped it over in other locations, it would exactly match. So that's what's going on here. And there's a variety of different ways that you can use this. And there's just so many things you can do with hexagonal symmetries. Let's hop over to another tiling where I have an expansion of this same structure with the hexagon and then the rhombi around it, the triangles filling those gaps between the rhombi. But this time that whole thing is my hexagon in question. So when I pull up the symmetries here, you can see I'm chopping around the entire central portion and copy pasting over. And this lets me add spacing between these copy pasted hexagons, so I could have these spaced much further apart if I chose. I can do this with any combination of hexagon, rhombus, triangle that wouldn't necessarily work as a more condensed form of the tiling. So I can have these rhombi spaced out here. I can put them further out. I can close that triangle if I want to and still get everything moving around in that same tiling fashion. So I can do things like bring the rhombus much closer in to the hexagon, and I would not have the ability to repeat this pattern further out if I was using those rhombi in twofold rotationally symmetric positions. But I do have that capability since I'm taking the whole block and repeating that whole block out. Likewise, I can take structures like we had for the lens stars and have that structure repeat out. I can do this for a wide variety of patterns. I have some more examples, but they're currently being pressed so they can be photographed. And then continuing onwards, there is another arrangement. So if you've been watching what a lot of other people have been posting on Flickr or Instagram, you might think you have to put rhombi next to hexagons if you want to have rhombi at all, but that is not actually the case. We can have our rhombi spread out outside of the triangles. So we can start like we're doing hexagons, then triangles, then hexagons, but then swap those next hexagons out for rhombi. And that's what I did in 3 more of these patterns. And actually that's a fun game to play. This pattern, I was at the Centerfold convention this weekend, and I folded a 32-fold grid, sat down at the table, and started asking everyone else at the table questions as I was folding. So I wanted to have this be 6-fold rotationally symmetric. I wanted to have the hexagon symmetry because I folded it on a hexagon. So I started with a hexagon in the middle. And I said, okay, do you want the central hexagon to be open or closed? They said closed. Okay, next question. Do you want the next twist to be a triangle or a rhombus? They said rhombus. So this pleat is actually going straight to the rhombus twist on the back side. Then I asked, okay, do you want that rhombus to be open or closed? And they said open. Next question, do you want that rhombus to be on the front or the back? They said back. So open rhombi on the back. So I was putting those in, and then I saw there was an opportunity to do either a closed or an open triangle. So I asked the next person, do you want to do a closed or an open triangle? They said open. And from there, I saw I had the potential in this pattern to make that triangle a position of threefold rotational symmetry. It interacts the same way with both of these rhombi. And so I asked the next person, do you want that triangle to be a position of threefold rotational symmetry, yes or no? And they said no. So I copied this whole thing over to these other positions. And you can really have a lot of fun playing these iterative games, like branching out all of these different options of tessellation design. So continuing, the hexagon triangle rhombus triangle tiling is one of my favorites. It has supreme flexibility. So where in this game, I only had the option to put the triangle open or closed, and whether I did it open or closed would determine whether I could use it for a position of threefold rotational symmetry. In the hexagon triangle rhombus triangle tiling, the triangle is never a position of threefold rotational symmetry, and you have free choice of whether to put it on the front or the back, as well as open or closed. So with this tiling, we bring up the full symmetry, and we can get exactly what we see in front of me right now, where I've got the hexagon in the sixfold rotationally symmetric positions. And let me scroll that down so it's more centered in view. Then the triangles are not in rotationally symmetric positions. The rhombi are in positions of twofold rotational symmetry, as we can see on our diagram here. And the spaces between the rhombi in the center of the loop of alternating triangles and rhombi are positions of threefold rotational symmetry. And so we can draw that hexagon around our center and copy and paste it over to other positions. That's what the smallest unit of a tessellation allows us to do. We can just take that, copy paste. And I say copy paste in a mathematical sense. Unfortunately, we still got to fold from the center out when we're folding our tessellations. We don't get off that easy. But when we're diagramming things, it can be really useful to know what this hexagonal structure of the tessellation is, so we can minimize the drawing that we need to do to get everything into place. So there's one example. Closed hexagon on the front, open triangles on the back, densely spaced, and standard rhombi back on the front. We get this rueda structure. And I can make the opposite decisions. So this one I said, okay, I'm going to have these open triangles on the back and standard rhombi on the front. Here, I chose to have those open triangles on the front and standard rhombi on the back. And so here we get gapped spaces between these open triangle star structures. So lots of options here. We can also have these same star structures and bring the rhombus onto the front. Same exact idea, but we get a completely different looking tessellation out of it. And then, last but not least, in this stack, in a different tiling that I do not have full diagrams for yet, I have the piece that I folded for the Origami Olympiad last year. where I have not just one rhombus next to my hexagon. I've got these rhombi on the back that are feeding into more rhombi on the front that then go to triangles in positions of threefold rotational symmetry. So I've still got this hexagon structure going on. And here again, the hexagon is the position of sixfold rotational symmetry, the triangle is a position of threefold rotational symmetry, and the rhombus is a position of twofold rotational symmetry, just like we had in lens stars. But this double whirlpools tessellation, I call it the double rhombus tiling, hexagon double rhombus triangle. We have another rhombus. In this case, I put it on the back where we have no rotational symmetry in that rhombus in and of itself. It just serves the broader pattern by adding these spaces out to the next twists over. And so there's all kinds of things that we can do with these hexagonal symmetries. And I invite you to drop in comments if that is something that you want to do. And I invite you to try folding hexagonal symmetry tessellations yourself. So one of the things that I teach my students is to pay attention to the symmetry while you're folding. So for example, we recently folded this tessellation together, my Tessellations by Tiles class last week. And we were paying attention to, okay, where are the positions of threefold, of twofold rotational symmetry? So then we could say, okay, I know I need a position of twofold rotational symmetry outside of this rhombus and triangle. Therefore, I am going to need another triangle twist on the opposite pleat of this tube coming out here. And I'm going to need another rhombus off the edge. And we could also say, okay, on the backside here, we're looking at these triangles. And if I have two of these triangles in place, and I know that there's a position of threefold rotational symmetry in the middle, then I know that however this triangle comes in, it needs to interact with the second triangle the way the second triangle interacted with the first. And likewise, the first needs to interact with the third the same way that the second interacted with the first and the third interacts with the second. So we can use these symmetries to locate positions on our tessellation that would be confusing to find if we were just looking at a crease pattern. We can locate these landmarks and see all of these options that are going on. And once we get good enough, we can even start going around and asking questions and folding freely without a crease pattern, knowing that we need to find our positions of twofold and threefold rotational symmetry and being aware of these tilings and how these structures are all tied together. So with that, I will conclude this talk on hexagonal symmetries in origami tessellations, and I invite you to go search, discover, find where you can see these symmetries in tessellations that you see online, and perhaps things you've already folded. And if you look down in the description below, you'll see a link to my Tessellations Foundation series, which is all about the background knowledge that you need to start folding tessellations of your own. So with that, have a great day and happy folding.